Picture, if you will, a late spring evening in the year 1263. The air is cool and faintly sweet, carrying the scent of hawthorn blossoms from the hedgerows that line the rolling English countryside. The sky is still pale above the western hills, that luminous, endless twilight that stretches across May evenings in this green and gentle land. Somewhere a blackbird is singing its unhurried song from the top of an elm, and there, rising from a low ridge above a shallow river, you see it. A castle, not the grand, towering fortress of legend, not yet. This is something more human, more lived in. A curtain wall of pale gray stone encircles a modest courtyard. Two round towers stand at the corners, their conical roofs dark against the fading sky. Within the walls you can see the peaked roof of a great hall, the smaller outline of a chapel, and the thin thread of smoke rising from a kitchen that has only just finished its evening work. Beyond the walls, a village of perhaps 30 homes clusters along the road, their thatched roofs golden in the last light. Sheep drift across a meadow. A dog barks once, twice, then falls silent. This is Ashmore, a name we give it for our story, though castles very much like it stood in dozens of places across the counties of Herefordshire, Shropshire, and the Welsh Marches in these years. It belongs to a minor lord, a man of moderate means and quiet temperament, and within its walls a community of some 60 souls rises each morning, works through each day, and rests each evening in a rhythm as old as the stones beneath their feet. Let us go inside. The heavy oak gate stands open in the morning, as it does on most peaceful days, and people move through it freely, farmers carrying baskets of early greens, a carter with a load of firewood, children chasing one another across the packed earth yard. The castle is not a sealed fortress tonight. It is a household, a community, a living, breathing place. Let us meet some of the people who call it home. There is Edmund the steward, a man of perhaps 45 years with a lean face weathered by decades of open air and careful thought. Edmund is not of noble birth. His father was a prosperous tenant farmer who saw to it that his son learned to read and to reckon. But he has spent 20 years managing the affairs of Ashmore, and there is no corner of this place he does not know. He oversees the accounts, settles disputes among the tenants, ensures that the harvest is stored and the walls are mended. He rises before dawn and retires well after dark, and if you were to ask him what gives his life its meaning, he would look at you with mild surprise, as though the answer were obvious. The work, he would say, the care of the place. The knowledge that when he walks the walls at evening and sees the fires burning in the village below, he has played some small part in the keeping of it all. There is Marjorie, the castle's herbalist and healer, a woman in her mid-30s who tends the walled garden that grows in a sheltered corner of the bailey. Marjorie's mother held this role before her, and her grandmother before that. A quiet lineage of women who understood the language of plants, who knew that feverfew could ease a headache, that lavender laid beneath a pillow could gentle a troubled sleep, that a poultice of comfrey could knit a broken bone. Marjorie moves through her days with a calm attentiveness, her hands stained green with the juices of the herbs she grinds in her stone mortar. She speaks softly and listens well, and the people of the castle and village alike come to her with their ailments and, just as often, with their worries. She has a way of asking a single quiet question that somehow untangles a knot a person did not know they carried. There is Roland, the master mason, a broad-shouldered man in his late 20s who has been working with stone since he was a boy of 12. Roland came to Ashmore 3 years ago to repair a crumbling section of the North Tower, and he has stayed, finding in this place a steadiness that his wandering life had lacked. He has clever hands and a patient eye, and there is something almost meditative in the way he works, choosing each stone, feeling its weight and shape, fitting it into the wall with a precision that needs no measuring line. Roland is a quiet man, more comfortable with the language of stone than the language of people. But when he speaks, it is with a thoughtfulness that surprises those who do not know him well. And there is Alice, Lady Alice, though she would not insist upon the title, the Lord's youngest sister, a woman of 24 who has returned to Ashmore after 2 years spent in the household of a distant cousin in Gloucester. Alice is educated, well read for her time, with a curiosity that sometimes unsettles the more traditional members of the household. She reads Latin. She keeps a small journal in which she copies passages from the books she borrows from the castle chaplain, and she has a habit of wandering the grounds in the early morning, watching the mist lift from the river, asking questions of anyone she encounters. She asks the baker how he knows when the bread is ready. She asks the falconer what the hawk sees from above. She asks the chaplain whether God hears the prayers of those who doubt, and the chaplain, to his credit, tells her that he believes perhaps those prayers are heard most clearly of all. These are some of the people of Ashmore. There are many others. The cook, Agnes, whose laughter fills the kitchen and whose pottage is the thing every traveler remembers longest. The gatekeeper, old Thomas, who has a story for every stone in the wall and a name for every star he can see from his post. The young page, Will, who dreams of the world beyond the hills and collects feathers from every bird he finds, pressing them between the pages of a psalter he cannot yet fully read. They are ordinary people, living ordinary lives, and yet, as we shall see, there is nothing ordinary about the care and thought and quiet courage it takes to build a life within these walls. Imagine a morning in late May. The light comes early, the palest gray seeping through the narrow windows of the castle chambers, brightening to the color of milk, then to gold. The birds have been singing since before the light, and now the chapel bell joins them, a single clear note that rings across the bailey and out over the fields, calling the household to the first prayers of the day. Not everyone attends. The chapel is small, fitted into the thickness of the south tower, with a vaulted ceiling and a single window of colored glass that throws a patch of blue and green across the stone floor when the morning sun strikes it. The Lord and his family kneel in the upper gallery. Below, a handful of the household gathers, those for whom this daily rhythm is a comfort, an anchor. Edmund is always here. So is Agnes the cook, who offers her own private prayer that the bread will rise well and the stores will hold. Marjorie sometimes comes, though just as often she is already in the garden, greeting the dawn in her own way, with her hands in the soil and the scent of rosemary around her. After prayers, the day opens like a flower. In the kitchen, Agnes and her 2 assistants have been working since well before dawn. The great hearth is already hot, the fire banked high with oak logs that glow orange at their centers, a cauldron of pottage, a thick stew of peas, onions, and the first young greens from the garden, hangs from an iron hook over the flames, its surface gently bubbling. The smell of it is deep and savory, the kind of warmth that seems to fill not just the room but the bones of anyone who enters. Loaves of bread are pulled from the side oven, their crusts dark and crackling, their insides soft and steaming. Agnes tears a corner from one to test it, nods to herself with satisfaction, and sets the loaves on a wooden board to cool. The kitchen is a world unto itself. Bundles of dried herbs hang from the ceiling beams, thyme, sage, mint, parsley. Strings of onions line one wall. There are crocks of salted butter, wheels of hard cheese wrapped in cloth, baskets of eggs collected just this morning from the hens that scratch and murmur in a pen beside the stable. The air is thick with smoke and steam, and the yeasty sweetness of baking, and beneath it all there is the faint, clean smell of the rushes that cover the floor, freshly laid with sprigs of meadow sweet to keep the air pleasant. Agnes moves through this space with the ease of long practice. She has been cooking in this kitchen for 19 years, since she was a girl of 14, and she carries the accumulated knowledge of 1,000 meals in her hands. She knows by sound when the fire is right. She knows by the color of the crust when the bread is done. She knows how much salt a pot of pottage needs without measuring, the way a musician knows a melody without reading the notes. Elsewhere the castle is stirring. In the stable the grooms are already at work, feeding and watering the horses, a dozen or so from the lord's riding horse, a fine bay palfrey, to the sturdy draft animals that pull the carts. The stable smells of hay and warm animal bodies, leather and the sweet dust of oats. The horses nicker softly as they eat. A barn cat whines between the stalls, hunting mice with silent efficiency. In the great hall, servants are setting up the trestle tables for the morning meal. White linen cloths are spread. Even in a modest household like Ashmore, the cloths are kept clean and white, a matter of pride. Wooden bowls and spoons are laid out. A jug of ale, brewed on the premises, stands ready. The hall itself is a high-ceilinged room, open to the timber rafters above, with a great fireplace at one end and the raised dais where the lord's family sits at the other. The walls are lime-washed and hung with a few simple tapestries, hunting scenes rendered in faded greens and browns, and the floor is strewn with rushes mixed with dried lavender, so that each step releases a faint, clean fragrance. The morning meal is simple and communal. The household gathers, lord and servant, mason and page, and eats together. The lord, Sir Geoffrey, is a mild-mannered man in his 50s who has never sought greatness and has found, in its absence, a kind of contentment. He eats his bread and cheese and drinks his ale and exchanges a few words with Edmund about the day's business, a section of fence that needs mending, a tenant whose rent is overdue, a letter that has arrived from a kinsman in France. It is this letter, as it happens, that will set the shape of our story. The letter is from Sir Geoffrey's cousin, a man named Henri de Clairvaux, who holds a modest estate in the rolling countryside south of Rouen, in Normandy. Henri writes to say that he is hosting a gathering in late summer, a celebration of the harvest, an occasion for music and feasting and the strengthening of the bonds between families separated by the sea. He invites Geoffrey to send a small party to represent Ashmore, to bring English wool and tin as gifts of trade, and to stay through the season. Sir Geoffrey reads the letter aloud at the morning meal, and a quiet ripple of interest passes through the hall. Travel, in this age, is no small thing. The roads are rough and long, the sea crossing unpredictable, and the world beyond the familiar hills is vast and unknown to most of the people who sit in this hall. And yet there is something in the idea of it, the promise of new sights, new tastes, new conversations, that kindles a gentle excitement. In the days that follow, a plan takes shape. Edmund will lead the party, for he has traveled before and knows the roads to the southern ports. Roland the mason will go, for Henri's letter mentions a building project, a new chapel, and skilled hands are always welcome. Young Will, the page, will accompany them, for it is part of his education to see the wider world, and Alice asks to go as well, surprising no one who knows her, for the chance to see France, to read in another language, to meet people whose lives are shaped by a different landscape. This is precisely the kind of experience she craves. There is a conversation, gentle and thoughtful as most things are in this quiet household, about whether it is proper for Alice to travel. Her brother, Sir Geoffrey, considers it carefully. He trusts Edmund. He knows his sister's mind, and he decides in the end that the world is better seen than imagined. She will go. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. There are still weeks of spring and early summer to live through before the journey begins, and these weeks are full of their own quiet richness. In the walled garden, Marjorie is in her element. June has brought warmth and long light, and the garden is overflowing. The raised beds, edged with woven hazel, are thick with growth. Sage spreads its soft gray-green leaves. Mint sends runners in every direction. The comfrey is tall and heavy with purple flowers, and the bees move among them with single-minded devotion, their hum a constant soothing presence. Along the south wall, where the stone holds the sun's heat well into the evening, the roses are beginning to open, deep red and pale pink, their fragrance drifting across the bailey on the warm air. Marjorie kneels among the beds, thinning the seedlings with careful fingers. She works slowly, deliberately, speaking softly to the plants as though they were old friends, which, in a sense, they are. She knows each one by name, by habit, by the particular quality of its scent when the leaves are crushed between her fingers. She knows that chamomile, dried and steeped in hot water, will ease a restless mind. She knows that elderflower, gathered at just the right moment, will make a cordial that can bring down a fever. She knows that the garden is not merely a collection of useful plants, but a living thing with its own moods and rhythms, its own way of speaking to those patient enough to listen. It is here, on a warm afternoon, that Alice finds her. Alice has been reading in the shade of the chapel wall, a borrowed copy of a treatise on the natural world, written by a Franciscan friar, and she has come to the garden with a question. She wants to know whether it is true that certain plants only flower in moonlight, as the text suggests. Marjorie looks up from her weeding, considers the question, and smiles. She tells Alice that the book is partly right. There are plants that open their blooms at dusk, and there is a night-flowering campion that grows wild in the hedgerows beyond the castle. But she adds gently that books can only teach you so much. The rest you learn from the soil beneath your hands. Alice kneels beside her, and Marjorie shows her how to thin the seedlings without disturbing the roots of the ones that remain. They work together in companionable silence, and something settles between them, a mutual respect, a recognition of kindred spirits. Alice with her books and her restless questions, Marjorie with her garden and her patient knowing. They see in each other a different way of reaching toward the same thing, an understanding of the world and one's place within it. Meanwhile, at the North Tower, Roland is at work. The wall here has been weakened by a hard winter, and a section near the base has begun to lean outward, ever so slightly. Roland has spent the morning examining the damage, running his hands over the stone, feeling for the cracks that are invisible to the eye but speak clearly to the fingertips. Now he is rebuilding, carefully removing the damaged stones, setting new ones in their place with a mortar of lime and sand, tapping each one into position with the handle of his chisel. There is a rhythm to the work that is almost musical. Tap, scrape, pause, the sound of the chisel on stone, the soft rasp of mortar being spread, the occasional low grunt of effort as a heavy block is lifted into place. Roland works with a kind of reverence, and if you were to ask him about it, he would say, in his quiet, halting way, "That stone is honest. It does not pretend to be something it is not. It is what it is, and your job is to understand it, to work with its nature rather than against it." Alice passes by on her way from the garden, and she pauses to watch. She has seen masons work before, of course, but she has never really watched, never noticed the care with which each stone is chosen, the way the wall rises, not as a uniform surface, but as a mosaic of individual pieces, each one different, each one necessary. She asks Roland how he knows which stone to place where, and he considers the question for a long moment before answering. He tells her that each stone has a face, a side that wants to be seen, and a side that wants to be hidden, and that his work is simply the art of reading those faces and setting them right. It is a small moment, a brief exchange between two people from very different stations in life, she, the sister of the Lord, he, a craftsman who works with his hands. But there is something in the way he speaks about the stone that catches her attention, the way a particular phrase in a book might catch it. She finds herself thinking about it later that evening, as the light fades and the swallows wheel above the towers. The weeks pass. The days lengthen, reaching their peak at midsummer, when the sun barely seems to set at all, and the twilight stretches into a luminous, dreaming blue that holds the world in a kind of suspended stillness. The village celebrates with a bonfire on the common, and the castle household joins them, a rare evening of leisure, when the distinctions between lord and tenant soften in the firelight and the shared pleasure of music and ale. Old Thomas, the gatekeeper, plays a wooden flute, and the melody is simple and sweet, a tune that seems to have been born from the landscape itself, from the river and the hills, and the long, slow turning of the seasons. Children dance. Agnes brings out honey cakes. Edmund stands at the edge of the firelight, watching it all with the quiet satisfaction of a man who has helped to build something good. And then, in the first week of July, the preparations for the journey begin in earnest. Chests are packed with English wool, fine creamy fleeces, tightly rolled and bound with cord. Small ingots of Cornish tin, wrapped in oiled cloth, are loaded into saddlebags. Provisions for the road are assembled, hard cheese, dried meat, apples, bread that will keep for days. Edmund reviews the route with Sir Geoffrey, south through the marches to Bristol, then by ship across the Channel to the Norman coast, and overland to Henri's estate near Rouen. Marjorie prepares a traveling kit of remedies for the party, dried chamomile for sleep, lavender oil for headaches, a small pot of comfrey salve for blisters and bruises. She presses the bundle into Edmund's hands with quiet instructions, and he accepts it with the solemnity of a man receiving something precious, which, in truth, he is. On the morning of departure, the castle gathers to see them off. Sir Geoffrey clasps Edmund's hand and tells him to represent Ashmore well. Agnes presses a wrapped parcel of honey cakes into Will's saddlebag and tells the boy to eat them slowly and to remember his manners. Thomas the gatekeeper raises his hand in farewell as the small party passes through the gate. Edmund on his grey riding horse, Roland on a sturdy brown cob, Alice on her palfrey with a groom riding alongside, and Will on a pony that is nearly too small for him, his face bright with barely contained excitement. And so they ride out into the morning, into the summer, into the wider world. Let us travel with them gently as one drifts from one dream into another. The road south is a green tunnel in July, the hedgerows thick and high, threaded with honeysuckle and dog roses. The air hums with bees and the lazy drone of insects. They pass through villages where women are washing linen in streams, where blacksmiths hammer at their forges in showers of sparks, where geese waddle across the road with the serene confidence of creatures who have never been hurried in their lives. They travel at the pace of the slowest horse, perhaps 20 miles on a good day, less if the roads are muddy or the hills are steep. There is no rush. Edmund sets a comfortable rhythm, and the party falls into it gratefully. They stop at midday to rest the horses and eat their provisions in the shade of an oak tree. They sleep at inns or in the guest houses of small monasteries, where the beds are plain but clean, and the evening prayers drift through the stone corridors like a lullaby. On the road, conversations bloom that would not have blossomed within the walls of Ashmore. Will, riding beside Edmund, asks question after question about the places they pass. Why the church in this village has a square tower and the one in the next has a round one. Why some fields are planted with wheat and others with barley. What lies beyond the furthest hill he can see. Edmund answers patiently and with a pleasure he did not expect, for he realizes that in explaining the world to the boy, he is seeing it afresh himself. Roland, who has traveled more widely than the others, begins to open up in a way he rarely does at Ashmore. He speaks of the quarries he has worked in, the great limestone beds of the Cotswolds, the red sandstone of the marches, and of the different qualities of stone, how each has its own character and demands its own approach. He speaks of a cathedral he once helped to build, and of the moment when the last stone of a great arch was set in place and the scaffolding was removed, and the whole structure stood on nothing but the rightness of its own design. He describes this with a quiet awe that reveals something Alice has begun to suspect, that Roland's relationship with his craft is not merely practical but philosophical. He sees in stone a metaphor for something larger, the idea that things can hold together not through force but through the care with which they are fitted. Alice listens, and something begins to grow between them. Not yet a romance, but the first tentative threads of a connection. A shared interest in how things are made and why they matter, a mutual recognition that the other sees the world with attention and care. They reach Bristol after 5 days of riding. The city is loud and vast by their standards, a great port town crammed with timber-framed houses, its harbor crowded with ships, its streets thick with merchants, sailors, pilgrims, and animals. The smell of the sea mixes with the smells of tar, saltfish, and wood smoke. Will stares at everything with enormous eyes. They board a merchant vessel the following morning, a broad, sturdy cog with a single square sail and a hull that smells of pitch and brine. The crossing takes 2 days, the sea calm enough in midsummer, the sky wide and blue above them. Ollie stands at the rail and watches the English coast dissolve into haze behind them, and feels something shift inside her, a loosening, a lightening, as though the sea has washed away some invisible boundary she did not know she was carrying. On the far shore, a new world begins. Imagine the countryside of Normandy in August. The fields are heavy with ripening wheat, golden and rustling in a breeze that carries the scent of warm earth and wild thyme. Apple orchards line the roads, the fruit still green but beginning to blush, the branches bowing under the weight of the coming harvest. The light here is different from England, softer, warmer, with a golden quality that seems to soak into the stone of the farmhouses and churches they pass. Henri de Clairvaux's chateau stands on a gentle rise above a bend in a quiet river. It is smaller than you might imagine, more manor house than fortress, with walls of creamy Norman limestone and a round tower at one corner that looks out over miles of rolling farmland. A vineyard slopes down to the south, its rows of vines orderly and green. The kitchen garden is twice the size of Marjorie's at Ashmore, overflowing with vegetables and herbs that thrive in the warmer climate. Basil and rosemary and great bushes of lavender that line the paths like fragrant hedges. Henry himself is a warm and generous host, a man in his 60s with a broad face and a ready laugh. He greets Edmund with an embrace, welcomes Roland with genuine interest in his craft, bows courteously to Alice, and claps young Will on the shoulder with a warmth that makes the boy feel instantly at ease. He speaks a mix of Norman French and English, switching between them with the fluidity of a man who has lived his life on the border between 2 cultures. Let us settle in here for a while and meet the people of this place. There is Isabeau, Henri's daughter, a woman of 30 who manages the household with a quiet authority that reminds one of Edmund. She keeps the accounts, oversees the kitchen, manages the servants, and somehow finds time to tend the rose garden that is her particular pride. She and Alice take to one another almost immediately, 2 women of intelligence and education in a world that does not always know what to make of them. There is Brother Severin, a Benedictine monk from a nearby priory who serves as Henri's chaplain and, more importantly, as the keeper of a modest but remarkable library. Brother Severin is a man of deep and gentle faith, but also of wide-ranging intellectual curiosity. He has read the Greek philosophers in Latin translation, he studies the movements of the stars, and he keeps a garden of medicinal herbs that rivals Marjorie's. When Alice discovers his library, a cool vaulted room in the base of the tower, its shelves lined with manuscripts in Latin and French, her face lights with a joy that is almost childlike. Brother Severin sees this and quietly offers her the freedom to read whatever she wishes for as long as she stays. There is also Arnaud, the vineyard keeper, a sun-browned man of middle years who has spent his entire life tending the same vines his father tended before him. Arnaud speaks only French and communicates with the English visitors through gestures, smiles, and the universal language of shared work. When Roland helps him repair a stone terrace wall in the vineyard, the 2 men work side by side in a comfortable silence that needs no translation. Arnaud brings out a jug of last year's wine when the work is done, and they sit on the wall they have just built and drink together, looking out over the river valley as the afternoon light turns everything to gold. The days in Normandy settle into a rhythm that is both familiar and new. The mornings begin with the chapel bell just as they do at Ashmore, but the prayers are in a slightly different cadence, the hymns in a slightly different key. The food is different too, more wine and less ale, more bread made from fine white flour, dishes flavored with herbs that do not grow easily in England. There are roasted vegetables glazed with honey and vinegar. There is cheese that is softer and more pungent than anything Agnes has ever made. There are pears poached in wine with cinnamon, served at the evening meal as a delicacy that makes Will close his eyes in quiet amazement. Alice spends her mornings in Brother Severin's library, reading. She discovers a text on natural philosophy that argues the world can be understood through careful observation, that the movements of the stars, the growth of plants, the behavior of animals all follow patterns that the human mind can learn to read. She discusses this with Brother Severin during long, wandering conversations that range from theology to botany to the nature of wonder itself. He tells her that in his view there is no contradiction between faith and curiosity, that the desire to understand the world is itself a form of prayer. This idea lodges in her mind like a seed and begins, quietly, to grow. Roland, meanwhile, has begun work on the foundation of Henri's new chapel. It is a small project, a simple single-room structure to replace a wooden one that has grown old and unsafe. But Roland approaches it with the same care he would give to a cathedral. He studies the ground, tests the soil, selects the stone from a local quarry. He draws plans in the dirt with a stick, showing Henri and Isabeau how the walls will rise, where the window will face east to catch the morning light, how the doorway will be wide enough for the oldest and frailest of the congregation to enter with ease. And in the evenings, when the work is done and the heat of the day has faded to a warm golden dusk, the household gathers in the courtyard for the evening meal. Trestle tables are set under a canopy of linen, candles are lit in iron holders, the wine flows freely, and the conversation is easy and warm, a mixture of languages, stories, laughter. Henri tells tales of his youth, of journeys to Paris and markets in Flanders. Isabeau describes the year the river flooded and the village worked together to save the vineyard. Brother Severin recites a passage from a poem about the beauty of the created world, and the words hang in the evening air like the scent of the roses. It is during one of these evenings that Roland finds himself sitting beside Alice, and the conversation turns to something more personal. She asks him where he learned his craft, and he tells her, slowly, carefully, as though selecting each word the way he would select a stone. He tells her about his father, who was also a mason, and who died when Roland was 16. He tells her about the years of wandering, from quarry to quarry, castle to castle, and about the loneliness of that life, and the way that working with stone became his way of making sense of a world that often felt too large and too uncertain. He tells her that when he places a stone in a wall and it fits, truly fits with no gap and no forcing, he feels a kind of peace that he has never been able to put into words. Alice listens with a stillness that tells him she understands, and she tells him, in turn, about her own restlessness, her hunger for knowledge, her frustration at the narrowness of the world she was born into, her conviction that there must be more to life than the roles that have been assigned to her. She speaks of the books she has read, the questions they have raised, the sense she has that understanding the world, truly understanding it, is the closest thing she knows to freedom. They sit together as the candles burn low and the stars appear above the Norman hills, and they do not touch, and they do not speak of what is growing between them, but it is there in the silence, as real and as patient as stone. Summer deepens, and then, almost imperceptibly, begins to turn. The nights grow cooler, the leaves on the apple trees take on a faint blush of gold. The grapes in Arnaud's vineyard darken and swell, and the air carries the rich, sweet scent of fruit nearing its fullness. A new letter arrives, this one from a master builder in the Rhineland, a man named Conrad, with whom Roland has corresponded through brother Severin. Conrad has heard of Roland's skill and invites him to visit a castle on the Rhine, where a great project of construction is underway. Henri, who has trading connections along the river, encourages the party to go and offers to send Arnaud's eldest son, Lucien, as a guide for the first leg of the journey. And so, in the first golden days of September, the party sets out once more, Edmund, Roland, Alice, and Will, now seasoned travelers, their hearts a little fuller and their view of the world a little wider than when they left Ashmore. The road east carries them through the heart of France, through forests of beech and oak where the leaves are just beginning to turn, through market towns where the annual fairs are in full swing, past monasteries whose bells ring the hours and whose orchards glow with ripening fruit. They cross rivers on narrow stone bridges. They sleep in wayside inns where the hearth fires are already lit against the evening chill. The landscape changes gradually as they move east. The gentle rolls of Normandy give way to broader plains, then to hills, then to the deep forested valleys of the Rhineland, where the trees rise tall and dark on either side of the road, and the air smells of pine and damp earth, and the faintest hint of wood smoke from charcoal burners working deep in the woods. And then, one afternoon, they crest a ridge and see it below them, the Rhine. The river is wide and silver-gray, moving with a slow, massive power that takes the breath away. And rising from the steep hillsides above it, one after another, are castles, dozens of them, their towers and walls catching the autumn light, their pennants stirring in the breeze that moves up the valley. These are not modest holdings like Ashmore. These are the strongholds of the Rhine lords, built on commanding heights to watch over the river and the trade that flows upon it. Will actually stops his pony and simply stares. Edmund, who has read about the Rhine but never seen it, feels something he cannot quite name, a sense of the world's vastness and his own smallness within it, and how these two things are not frightening but somehow comforting, as though the world is large enough to hold all of them and all their small concerns without effort. The castle they are seeking sits on a rocky promontory above a bend in the river, surrounded by vineyards that cascade down the hillside in terraces of gray stone. It is a larger and more formidable structure than either Ashmore or Henri's chateau, a true fortress of the German style, with a tall central tower called a Bergfried, thick curtain walls, and a great hall whose windows look out over the river valley below. The lord of this castle is a minor count named Friedrich, a scholarly, thoughtful man with a neatly trimmed beard and a passion for building. He has welcomed Conrad, the master builder, to oversee the construction of a new residential wing, a modern, comfortable space with large windows, fireplaces in every room, and a private chapel adorned with carved stone. Conrad is a man in his 50s, gray-haired and sharp-eyed, with a booming voice that belies his gentle nature. When he meets Roland, the two masons clasp hands and then stand back and study each other with the appraising eye of men who share a deep and particular understanding. Life in Friedrich's castle has a different quality from the gentler households of Ashmore and Normandy. There is more formality here, more structure. The household is larger, perhaps 100 people, and the hierarchy is more visible. Servants in livery move through the corridors with practiced efficiency. The meals are elaborate, served in courses with ritual and ceremony. Friedrich sits at the high table on a carved oak chair beneath a canopy, and the seating arrangements are carefully observed. And yet, beneath this formality, the same human warmth persists. Friedrich's wife, Hildegard, is a woman of great kindness who notices immediately that Will is overwhelmed by the grandeur of the place and takes it upon herself to make him feel welcome, showing him the mews where the hunting falcons are kept and introducing him to the castle's enormous gentle wolfhound, who becomes Will's devoted companion for the duration of their stay. There is also a woman named Gertrude, a woodcarver who works in a small workshop in the Outer Bailey. Gertrude is one of the few women in a traditionally male craft, and she has earned her place through sheer excellence. Her carvings, altar panels, furniture, decorative corbels are extraordinary in their detail and delicacy. She carves oak and lime wood into flowers, leaves, and human faces that seem almost to breathe. When Alice visits her workshop, she is struck by the similarity between Gertrude's relationship to wood and Roland's relationship to stone. The same patience, the same reverence, the same sense that the material itself has something to say, and the craftsperson's job is to listen. Roland and Conrad work together on the construction of the new wing, and the partnership is one of deep mutual respect. Conrad has techniques that Roland has never seen, ways of cutting stone, methods of vaulting and buttressing that are more advanced than anything used in England. Roland absorbs it all with the quiet hunger of a man who has been given access to knowledge he has long sought. In return, he shares with Conrad the English method of dressing limestone, a technique that Conrad admits is more refined than his own. They work side by side through the golden days of October, and the walls of the new wing begin to rise. There is something profound about watching a building take shape, the way raw stone and rough timber are slowly transformed into something with proportion, with grace, with purpose. Roland tries to explain this to Alice one evening as they walk along the ramparts and watch the sun set over the river. He says that a good building is like a good life. It holds together not because any single stone is perfect, but because each one is placed with care in the right relationship to the ones around it. Alice is quiet for a moment, turning this over. Then she says that she has been thinking something similar about the book she has read, that no single text holds the whole truth, but that each one adds something, and together they form a kind of structure, a way of understanding the world that is stronger than any single idea. They look at each other, and something passes between them, a recognition, a warmth, a tentative hope. And though neither speaks of it directly, they both know that what began as curiosity has grown into something deeper. The autumn deepens. The vineyards blaze with color, red and gold and deep amber, and the grape harvest begins. The whole castle turns out for it, from the count to the lowest kitchen servant, and for a few days the rigid hierarchies of daily life dissolve in the shared labor of gathering the fruit. Alice picks grapes alongside Gertrude the woodcarver and a young serving girl named Lotte, and they laugh together as the juice stains their fingers purple. Roland carries baskets of grapes on his broad shoulders, and Will darts between the rows of vines, eating more than he puts in his basket, his face sticky with juice and happiness. In the evenings, Friedrich hosts gatherings in the great hall where scholars, monks, and travelers share stories and ideas. One evening, a wandering Franciscan friar speaks about a concept that captures Alice's imagination. The idea that every person, regardless of station, carries within them a spark of the divine, and that the purpose of a life is not to achieve greatness, but to tend that spark, to let it illuminate the small circle of the world that is yours to care for. Alice looks across the hall at Edmund, who is listening with his usual quiet attention, and at Roland, who is sitting with Conrad and nodding slowly, and at Will, who has fallen asleep against the wolfhound, and she thinks that she has never understood this idea more clearly than she does in this moment. November comes, and with it the first real cold. Frost whitens the vineyards. The river mist rises thick and slow in the mornings, veiling the castles on the opposite bank like something from a half-remembered dream. It is time to go home. The farewells are warm and unhurried. Conrad gives Roland a set of fine German chisels, beautifully made, and tells him that he expects great things from him. Friedrich thanks Edmund for the English wool, which is the finest he has ever felt, and sends gifts in return, barrels of Rhine wine and a bolt of fine linen. Hildegard gives Will a feather from one of her falcons, and the boy holds it as though it were made of gold. Gertrude gives Alice a small carved figure, a woman reading a book, and Alice holds it in both hands and finds to her surprise that she cannot speak. The road home is long and the weather is turning, but there is a sweetness to it, the sweetness of returning, of carrying new knowledge and new friendships back to the place where they will be most needed. They travel west through the autumn landscape, and the conversations on the road are different now, deeper, more reflective. Edmund speaks about what he has learned from watching the households of Normandy and the Rhineland, and how he might bring some of their practices back to Ashmore. The way Henri's estate manages its orchards, the way Friedrich's household keeps its accounts. He is already planning, already thinking ahead, and there is a quiet contentment in this that is very much his own. Roland is quieter than usual, but it is the quiet of a man whose mind is full. He carries Conrad's chisels in his saddlebag, and he carries something else too, a vision of what he might build back at Ashmore with the new techniques he has learned, the chapel. He will build the chapel, not for himself, but for the place, for the people. And Alice rides beside him more often than not, and their conversations are easy now, the way conversations are between people who have discovered that they think about the world in the same way, even if they come at it from different directions. She speaks to him of what she has read in Brother Severin's library. He tells her about the stone he has worked with, and how each type has taught him something. They do not speak of the future. It is too uncertain, too complicated, but there is a gentleness between them that both of them guard carefully, the way one guards a candle flame in wind. Will, meanwhile, has grown, not taller perhaps, though even that may be true. He is a boy, after all, and boys grow in sudden spurts. But he has grown in the way that matters more. He has seen the sea. He has eaten pears poached in wine. He has stood on the walls of a castle above the Rhine and watched the river carry boats toward places he cannot even imagine. He has learned a few words of French and a few words of German, and he has learned something larger than any language, that the world is wider and kinder than he had been told, and that his place in it is not fixed, but full of possibility. They crossed the channel on a gray November morning, the sea rougher now than it was in summer, the cliffs of England appearing through the mist like a benediction, and they ride north through the bare brown fields, under skies that are heavy with the promise of rain, and the roads are muddy and the inns are cold, but none of them cares, because every mile brings them closer to home. Ashmore appears on a December afternoon, and it looks exactly as they left it, and entirely different. The same gray walls, the same round towers, the same thread of smoke from the kitchen, but seen now through eyes that have widened, it seems both smaller and more precious than they remembered. Thomas the gatekeeper sees them first and lets out a shout that brings half the castle running. Agnes emerges from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron, and wraps Will in an embrace that nearly lifts him off the ground. Sir Geoffrey clasps Edmund's hand and holds it for a long moment, and there is a warmth in his eyes that says more than words could manage. Marjorie stands quietly at the edge of the courtyard, and when Alice catches her eye, they exchange a smile that holds the promise of a long conversation to come. About Normandy, about the library, about all the things Alice has seen and thought and wondered. And Roland walks through the gate and stops. He stands in the courtyard, looking up at the walls he has mended, the tower he has repaired, the stones he has laid with his own hands, and for the first time he does not see Ashmore as a place he came to by accident and stayed in by inertia. He sees it as the place where he belongs. The days settle into the rhythm of winter. The castle draws inward. The days are short, the nights long and cold, and the household spends more time by the fire, closer together, in the way that all living things draw together when the world grows dark and still. The great hall, which in summer can feel almost too large, now feels just right. Its warmth, its light, its sounds of conversation and laughter, and the crackle of burning oak filling the space and making it feel like the center of the world, which, for these people, it is. Marjorie's garden sleeps beneath a thin blanket of frost, but her work continues, drying the herbs she harvested in autumn, preparing tinctures and salves in the small room she keeps beside the kitchen, where the shelves are lined with clay pots labeled in her careful hand. She has taught Alice the names of several plants and their uses, and Alice, in turn, has shared with her what she learned from Brother Severin's herb garden in Normandy, varieties and methods that Marjorie has never encountered. The two women sit together in the evenings, sometimes reading, sometimes simply talking, and their friendship, this bridge between learning from books and learning from soil, becomes one of the quiet treasures of the castle's winter life. Edmund has begun to implement some of the ideas he brought back from the journey. He has reorganized the castle's accounts using a method he observed at Friedrich's estate. He has begun planning a small orchard in the style of Henri's, and he has written to a merchant in Bristol about obtaining saplings of a French apple variety that he tasted in Normandy and has not been able to forget. These are small changes, practical and unheroic, but they are the kind of changes that, over years, transform a place, the way a river, given enough time, can reshape a valley. Roland has begun drawing plans for the new chapel. He works by candlelight in the great hall long after the others have retired, sketching on sheets of parchment that Edmund has given him. The design is simple, a single room with a vaulted ceiling, a doorway facing west, a window facing east. But into this simplicity he has poured everything he has learned, from the quarries of England, from the chateaux of Normandy, from the great construction project on the Rhine. He thinks of Conrad's words about proportion, of Gertrude's quiet observation that the best work is the work that serves the people who will use it, and he draws the doorway wide and the window tall and the ceiling high enough that when a person stands inside they will feel, without quite knowing why, that they have room to breathe. Alice finds him one evening, bent over his parchment, and she looks at the drawing and says nothing for a long time. Then she tells him that it is beautiful. He looks up at her, and there is a vulnerability in his face that she has never seen before. The vulnerability of a person who has made something from the deepest part of themselves and is showing it to someone whose opinion matters more than they can say. She sits down beside him, and they talk about the chapel, where it will stand, what stone will be used, how the light will fall through the eastern window on a winter morning. And then the conversation drifts, as their conversations always do, to larger things, to what it means to build something that will outlast you, to what it means to find the place where your particular gifts are needed, to the strange and wonderful fact that two people can come from entirely different worlds and still, somehow, speak the same language. Outside, snow is beginning to fall. The first snow of the winter, soft and silent, covering the courtyard and the walls and the fields beyond in a blanket of white that seems to muffle every sound, as though the world itself is settling down to rest. Christmas comes, and with it a warmth that defies the cold. The great hall is transformed. Garlands of holly and ivy are wound around the pillars and draped along the walls, their dark green leaves and red berries vivid against the pale stone. Candles are everywhere, on the tables, in the window embrasures, along the mantelpiece, their light warm and golden, making the hall glow like a jewel in the surrounding darkness. A great Yule log burns in the fireplace, an enormous oak trunk that will smolder for days, its heat radiating outward in waves that reach every corner of the room. Agnes has outdone herself. The kitchen has been working for days, and the smells that drift through the castle are intoxicating. Roasting meat, baking bread, spiced wine simmering in a great iron pot with cloves and cinnamon and honey. There are pies filled with minced fruits and nuts. There is a great wheel of cheese brought up from the cellar where it has been aging since the autumn. There are baskets of winter apples stored carefully in straw, their skins still firm and fragrant. The entire household gathers for the feast, lord and servant, mason and healer, page and gatekeeper, and for this one evening the usual order of seating gives way to something more communal. Sir Geoffrey sits at the high table, but he beckons Edmund to sit beside him, and old Thomas is given the place of honor near the fire, and Will sits between Marjorie and Agnes and is given a cup of spiced wine that makes his cheeks flush and his eyes go wide. After the meal there is music. Thomas brings out his wooden flute, and one of the kitchen boys produces a small drum, and together they play the old songs, the ones that everyone knows, the ones that seem to have existed since before anyone can remember. People sing. It is not a polished performance. The voices are rough and sweet and human, and they fill the hall with a sound that is more than music. It is the sound of a community, of people who have shared a year of work and weather and ordinary days, and who have found in that sharing something worth celebrating. Alice and Roland sit near each other, and at one point during the singing she leans toward him and says something that only he can hear. We do not know what she says. Perhaps she thanks him for something. Perhaps she tells him about a passage she has read. Perhaps she simply says that she is glad he is here. Whatever it is, he smiles, a real smile, unguarded and full, and the candlelight catches his face, and she sees in it the same thing she sees in his work with stone. A steadiness, a care, a devotion to getting things right. Later, when the fire is burned low and the songs have faded to murmurs and the children have fallen asleep on the benches, Edmund steps outside into the courtyard and stands in the silence. The snow has stopped, the sky has cleared, and the stars are brilliant, more stars than a modern eye can imagine, for there is no light in this world but fire, and the darkness between the stars is absolute. Edmund looks up at them, and he thinks about the year that has passed, the journey, the castles, the people he has met, the things he has learned. He thinks about Henri's laughter, and Conrad's handshake, and Brother Severin's quiet wisdom. He thinks about the vineyard at sunset, and the Rhine at dawn, and the sound of Roland's chisel on stone. And he thinks about this place, this small, imperfect, beloved place, and the people inside it, and the year ahead, and all the years after that, stretching forward into a future he cannot see but trusts, somehow, will be worthy of the care they have given it. He breathes. The air is cold and clean. The castle is quiet. Above him, the stars turn slowly in their ancient, unhurried dance. And now let us leave them there, Edmund beneath his stars, Alice and Roland by their fading fire, Will dreaming of falcons and rivers and roads, Agnes banking the kitchen hearth for the night, Marjorie in her small room among her jars and dried flowers, Thomas at his post, watching the snow-covered road that leads to the world beyond. Let us leave them in the gentle care of the night. The castle sleeps, the candles gutter and go dark, one by one. The great hall cools, the embers in the fireplace settling with soft, occasional sighs. Snow lies on the battlements and the tower roofs and the chapel that Roland will begin to build in the spring, a small, beautiful thing that will stand for centuries, though he does not know that yet. He only knows that it will be his best work, and that he will build it with care, and that in building it, he will be building something more than stone. Outside, the fields are white and still. The river moves beneath a thin skin of ice, murmuring its way through the valley as it has done since long before this castle was built, and will continue to do long after its walls have fallen. The sheep huddle in their fold. The horses doze in the stable. The owl that lives in the elm tree watches the world with eyes like lanterns and sees nothing moving, nothing at all. This is how the world was once, smaller and slower and lit by fire. A world where people lived close to the stone and the soil and the seasons, where a single journey could change the shape of a life, where the greatest luxury was not gold or silk, but a warm room, good bread, and the company of people who knew your name. It was not a perfect world. It was often hard and cold and uncertain. But within the walls of these castles, and there were thousands of them scattered across England and France and Germany and all the lands of Europe, ordinary people found ways to live with purpose and meaning. They built, and they planted, and they healed, and they cooked, and they loved, and they wondered about the stars and the turning of the year, just as you do. They lay down at the end of their days, just as you are lying down now, and they let the darkness come, and they trusted that the morning would follow. So let the morning wait. Let the snow fall softly on the castle walls. Let the embers glow in the great hall fireplace. Let the river murmur its ancient song beneath the ice. Let the stars turn, unhurried, in the great dark sky above the tower.